The sky over Bremen. The fateful encounter. December 20, 1943, 27,000 feet above Bremen, Germany. The sky was a vast expanse of cold steel and smoke. The deep hum of the Wright cyclone engines echoed like a metallic heartbeat, heavy, weary, yet persistent. Inside the American B-17 bomber, the old pub, 21-year-old Lieutenant Charlie Brown fought to keep the crippled aircraft in the air. The B-17 shuddered like a wounded beast. Its fuselage was riddled with holes, cockpit glass shattered, and the nose completely torn off. Freezing winds slashed against Brown's face, carrying the scent of burnt oil and blood. His co-pilot was unconscious, the tail gunner dead, and the remaining men, bleeding and pale, clung to life with desperate strength. The radio hissed, no response. The bomber formation had already scattered after the German flak opened fire. Shrapnel tore through the metal body, knocking out another engine and crippling the hydraulics. Still, Brown refused to give up. "We're going home," he whispered to himself, more a prayer than an order. Outside, silence. Then a sharp, rising whine, the unmistakable sound of an approaching fighter. Through the cracked glass, Brown saw it. A Messerschmitt Bard 109, closing fast. At the controls was Franz Stigler, a Luftwaffe ace, a veteran of North Africa and the defense of the fatherland. With 22 victories to his name, one more would earn him the Knight's Cross, one of Germany's highest honors. He spotted the B-17 limping through the sky and pushed the throttle forward. The approach was swift. He expected return fire, but none came. What he saw made him hesitate. The bomber was torn apart, nearly unrecognizable. Through the gaping holes he could see men inside, wounded, tending to one another, their faces ghostly and blood-stained. He could have ended it in seconds, just a pull of the trigger. But something stopped him. For a moment, Franz didn't see enemies, only human beings. He remembered the words of his former commander, Gustav Rodel, "You fight with honor. If I ever find you shooting at a man in a parachute, you'll never fly with me again." Stigler lowered his hand from the trigger. He maneuvered closer, now flying wing to wing with the bomber. Inside, Brown's crew panicked. "My God, he's going to finish us," one of them said. But the German didn't fire. Franz gestured, waving his hand, signaling them to turn west. Brown didn't understand at first. He tried to evade, the B-17 wobbling dangerously. Still, Stigler stayed beside them, a guardian of iron in the frozen sky. For several minutes, they flew together. Below them, German anti-aircraft crews, prepared to fire, but held back when they saw the Luftwaffe fighter escorting the enemy. It was an impossible sight, a German pilot guiding an American bomber out of Germany. When they reached the North Sea, Stigler knew it was over. If anyone saw him, he'd be branded a traitor. He looked once more at Brown, and, with a slow motion, raised his hand in salute. Brown, stunned, returned the gesture. Moments later, the Messerschmitt banked away and disappeared into the clouds. The old pub limped across the channel and made it home. A flying miracle. Brown and his crew survived. When they reported the encounter, no one believed them. "A German pilot escorted you." "Impossible," they said. But Brown knew what he had seen. A man who had chosen honor over glory. The name Franz Stigler would remain unknown for decades, until fate brought them together again. 40 years later. Section 2. Echoes of Honor. The silence and the reunion. The yacht pub crossed the North Sea like a living shadow, groaning with every gust of wind. Inside, the silence was broken only by the sputtering engine and the faint moans of men fighting to stay conscious. Charlie Brown stared into the horizon, unable to comprehend what had just happened. A German pilot had spared their lives. It defied everything he'd ever been told about war. When the B-17 finally touched down on a British airbase, the crew was poured out, barely conscious. Medics and officers rushed to help them. But what truly stunned everyone was Brown's report. With tears still in his eyes, he tried to explain. A Luftwaffe fighter. He flew beside us. He could have destroyed us, but he didn't. His superiors exchanged doubtful looks. You must have imagined it. Maybe he ran out of ammo, but Brown insisted. He remembered the German's face through the cracked glass, the steady gaze, the strange, almost compassionate expression. No one believed him. The incident was logged and dismissed as a combat anomaly. Meanwhile, across the war-torn skies, Franz Stigler landed his Messerschmitt at a base near Husum. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, heart still pounding. He knew exactly what he had risked. If anyone discovered he had escorted an enemy bomber, he would be shot for treason. As he stepped out of his aircraft, a fellow pilot smirked. "No kills today, Stigler. Losing your touch." Franz smiled faintly. Not every fight deserves a shot. He never told anyone what he had done. Not his commanders, not even his family. For him, that moment wasn't about glory. It was about conscience. Years passed. The war ended. The world moved on. Charlie Brown stayed in the Air Force, later joining the diplomatic corps. Franz Stigler became a civilian pilot and eventually settled in Canada. Yet neither of them ever forgot that winter sky over Bremen in 1987. Now an old man, Brown sat by his fireplace and finally decided to tell the story. He published an article in a veterans magazine asking for help. "I'm looking for the German pilot who spared my crew I want to thank him." The story spread through veteran networks across the world until it reached Franz Stigler. As he read the words, he froze. Every detail matched. The location, the bomber, the salute. He whispered to himself, "My God, it's the American." With trembling hands, he wrote a letter. Days later, Charlie Brown opened an envelope. "My name is Franz Stigler. I was the pilot of the Messerschmitt that flew beside you that day over Bremen." Their reunion took place in 1990. In Florida, two men who had once been enemies embraced, their eyes filled with tears, like brothers reuniting after a lifetime apart. From that day on, they were inseparable, traveling together, giving lectures, their families becoming one. When asked why he hadn't pulled the trigger, Stigler said, "I couldn't kill that plane. It was a miracle in the sky. If I had shot it down, I couldn't have lived with myself." And Brown added, "Franz showed me what honor truly means. He was the bravest man I ever met." Both men passed away in 2008, only months apart, as if the bond they had forged in the skies had finally come full circle. Today, the world remembers their story as the gentleman's encounter in the sky, an eternal reminder that even in the darkest hours of humanity, the light of compassion can still shine. The flame of humanity, the legacy of the Bremen sky. The reunion of Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler was more than a meeting between two war veterans. It was the rebirth of something the war had nearly extinguished. Honor after their first embrace. The silence between them spoke louder than any words. Two men, separated by flags, ideologies, and decades, now shared the same respect and the same memory. They sat side by side, reliving that cold day in December 1943. Brown described how his terrified crew, without hope, believed they would be shot down at any moment. Stigler, with a distant gaze, explained what had led to his decision. He said that when he saw the wounded men and the devastation inside the B-17, he could no longer see enemies, only young men who wanted to go home. Shooting down that plane would have been like shooting a man in a parachute. He said, "It was something I couldn't do." From that day on, the two traveled across the continent, sharing their story with schools, veterans, and historians, not as heroes, but as witnesses of humanity amid the madness of war. In every talk, Franz would emphasize one truth that summed it all up. We pilots fought each other, yes, but we were also fighting what was worst within ourselves. Hatred. And Brown, always moved, would close their talks by saying, Franz taught me that even the enemy can be a man of principle. Courage isn't always in pulling the trigger. Sometimes, it's in choosing not to. They both knew their story was an exception in a time of brutality, but perhaps that was why it resonated so deeply. Magazines, documentaries, and historians began referring to it as the gentleman's encounter in the sky. In 2012, writer Adam Makos published A Higher Call, a book that immortalized their story and revealed new details, the emotions, the risks, and the moral weight behind that solitary act of mercy. In their final years, Brown and Stigler became like brothers. They called each other often, celebrated birthdays together, and affectionately referred to one another as brother in arms. When Brown passed away in November 2008, Stigler was devastated. A few months later, he too passed, as if their journeys had been connected ever since that flight over Bremen. Today, their story is remembered, not merely as a wartime episode, but as a lesson in humanity. In a world where blind obedience often outweighed compassion, one German pilot chose mercy. Amid the chaos of the greatest conflict in modern history, two men proved that the truest victory does not lie in destroying your enemy, but in preserving what makes you human. And in the frozen skies of December 1943, for one brief shining moment, humanity won the war.
Thank you for watching this incredible, true story. If this moment of humanity in the middle of war moved you, make sure to leave a like and share this video with someone who loves history. And if you don't want to miss the next untold story of World War II, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and join us on this journey through the past. Because here, every story reminds us of what it truly means to be human, even in times of war.